So I guess maybe it would be helpful at the start for you to lay out in a nutshell why you're a deontologist, and then I'll lay out why I'm not a deontologist, just sort of very briefly. And then we can talk about the sort of more specific reasons.
Let's do it. I think the main, if I had to put it in one word, it would be consent. I think deontology is about rights and duties and limits on what we can do to other people. And how do we know that that matters over and above concern for other people's well-being? Well, because we take their consent seriously. I might think that, Matthew's spare kidney could be better used in somebody else's body. But if I want access to it, I got to ask Matthew. And I don't think that's just because I need to check with, make sure he doesn't have, some nice ideas for what to do with it next. I think it's sort of his decision what happens to his body. Similarly, I think if you rightfully own some property, and that might be a big if, right? Maybe you have political philosophy views that tell in favor of communal property, but if you or maybe a commune owns some property, then I think to some extent it should be up to you or the group what shall be done with it. That's my starting point for thinking about deontology. Ugly word, I'm very sorry, but you'll never guess who actually came up with the word deontology. Matthew, do you know this one?
It was, I think it was Bentham.
It was Bentham. Yeah, he didn't use it in this sense. He used it as like a kind of part of an ethical theory. But it's come to be like consequentialism and like utilitarianism. These terms have squiggly lifelines and squiggly paths. So deontology has now come to be an alternative to utilitarianism that says that other people's rights matter. We owe them things, and that you can't just reduce this to what would be nice or good for the world or for our happiness.
Yeah. So I guess the reason I'm a utilitarian and not a deontologist, there are kind of two broad classes of reason. The first one is so I think the actions that utilitarianism prescribes are something like the actions that you would take if you lived everyone's life. So if after you died, you lived the life of everyone else on the planet, and then um and then you sort of just like try to maximize how well your own life goes. And I guess I have kind of two thoughts about that. The first one is that intuitively does seem to capture morality where you count everyone's interests equally. And the second one is it does seem puzzling that in a case where you describe after you die that you will live the life of everyone else on Earth, it seems strange that you would regret acting rightly. So like there would be an action you did that you thought was morally right, and then you're like, oh no, I'll have to experience what the victim experienced of this action. It doesn't make sense. Oh, I massively regret this. But of course, if you did learn that after you uh died, you would live the life of everyone on Earth. Well, of course, then you would be in favor of killing one person and harvesting their organs to save five. And so that strikes me as some consideration in favor of it. So I do kind of buy these kind of like these arguments where you say there's some imagined scenario, like a scenario where you live everyone's life or act behind the veil of ignorance, where it would make sense to be a utilitarian. And then these scenarios do intuitively seem to capture ethics. The second reason, and the one that's more significant, is I think that when the relevant deontological intuitions, I think that there are both a good number of utilitarian intuitions and of deontological intuitions. But the utilitarian intuitions that conflict with deontology, they strike me as both being more diverse. So like the anti-rights violating intuitions, really there's just one broad kind of intuition that people have, which is it's wrong to do a bad thing to prevent more instances of the bad thing. That's why it's wrong to kill one person and harvest their organs to save five. In contrast, for the intuitions that push against this, and I assume we'll talk about these, there seem to be lots of different intuitions along these lines. There seem to be intuitions that are sort of like more procedural and decision theoretic, like intuitions having to do with transitivity, things along those lines, things having to do with what an impartial agent should prefer. And so it would strike me as being more surprising if we were mistaken about all these different procedural principles than if we were mistaken about just our judgments about cases. And then I also think that the intuitions supporting utilitarianism are more methodologically sound. They're sort of less about cases and more about broader principles. And so they're less likely to be the results of emotions or biases. And I think there's a kind of probabilistic reason to prefer them, which is that if a principle applies to lots of cases, you'd expect there, assuming our intuitions are not infallible, you'd expect there to be some cases where it would turn out to be counterintuitive, even if it were correct. Like if a principle implies 1,000 things about cases, and it implies 1,000 case judgments, and you think our case judgments have an error rate of 1 in 1,000, then you'd expect it to be a counterintuitive in at least one case. So for that reason, I think So for that reason, I think if a true principle conflicts with a case, if there's a principle that strikes you as true and a case judgment that strikes you as true, in general, all else equal, you should privilege the principle intuition. And then I think when you do that, basically all the principles are on the side of utilitarianism. So the most methodologically trustworthy intuitions are the ones that favor utilitarianism and that disfavor deontology. Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of my basic case.
Okay, let me hit you with an objection then. So
Okay.
I agree that if
I
you're
didn't realize doing such. I didn't realize you'd be raising objections. Wow.
no, it's the gloves are off now that Richard's gone. Now, the love fest is over. No, so okay, I that was great. I think you really nicely laid out the case. But I worry that there's a kind of pincer for utilitarianism. Okay, so utilitarians believe two things. First, they think there's one good thing, which is utility or happiness, or either it's getting what you want, or getting everybody getting what they want, or warm fuzzies, pleasure over pain. But one way or another, there's just one good thing. Secondly, there's one right thing, which is making more goodness, right? So the right action is the one that creates the most goodness. What's goodness? It's just whatever creates more utility. So I think that that has a nice unity to it. I mean, monism about the good, monism about the right, and it allows you to rank everything, as you said, transitively. So you can just think of all of ethics as flowing from how many utilitons, are created by each action. So it's very nice and convenient and lovely and elegant. But I think that those two monisms together are very hard to sustain. So in particular, you said there's one kind of counterexample to utilitarianism where, I violate a right, uh, but it makes for more utility and it seems wrong, like harvesting organs, shoving guys in front of trolleys, and so on. But actually, there's also counterexamples to the theory of what's good. So take like actually, this is I'll give you Frank Jackson, Australian utilitarian and philosophy legend, once told me he thought this was the hardest case for utilitarianism. Let's imagine you can either mow your own lawn or mow your neighbor's lawn, and your neighbor needs it less, and you mow it for them. He said utilitarianism says that's wrong. Why? Because you should value your own utility at least as much as everybody else's. And if you're giving somebody a lesser good, then when you could have given yourself a greater good, I mean, each counts for one. You should be, that's morally wrong. But Jackson kind of admits, I don't know, like he's like, I'm okay with the stealing a kidney, maybe killing your grandma to stop 5 grandmas from being killed, but mowing your neighbor's lawn should be okay. So this kind of case is sometimes called agent sacrifice. And let me just pitch that case to you first, and then we'll talk about the broader methodology stuff next.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say about this case, so I agree that it seems weird to describe that action as morally wrong. Um, but I think what I think of utilitarianism is as sort of a theory of what you have most reason to do. So it's like a thing of what all things considered you should do. And I think terms like morally wrong, or immoral, these are often thick concepts that really refer to instances of failing to do the optimal thing. And in fact, and not merely of failing to do the optimal thing, but of doing things that are suboptimal on account of their effects on others, right? So there are lots of actions that I think anyone would agree are not the ones that you have most reason to do, but that it seems weird to describe them as immoral, right? So let's imagine that you gave up your life to prevent my big toe from being destroyed.
Yeah.
Clearly, you shouldn't do that. The God would not advise you to perform that action. That wouldn't be the action that that he'd want you to do, all things considered, right? But but nonetheless, it would seem weird to describe, wow, Daniel just did a horrendously immoral thing after that, because I think the word immoral is a thick concept, and so it's just like it would also be weird to describe it as an unjust thing, but that's because unjust doesn't merely refer to things that you don't have decisive reason to. I should clarify just one other thing, is that I don't think that this is the only class of apparent counterexamples to utilitarianism. I think this is sort of like the primary class that supports deontology.
Right, right, right.
There are also other ones involving like desert or involving other things. But those I think there are similar objections to them that render them more impossible.
Nice, very nice point. Um, so immoral actions would be ones that like you shouldn't do, and they also have some other character like, like what?
So I
You
think
said
an
it's,
immoral action is something like an action that you shouldn't do, all things considered, because of its impact on others.
so, I mean, that seems like that shouldn't matter if you're a utilitarian, though. It seems like concern for morality as opposed to what you should do would be a kind of illusory thing.
Right. Well, right. So all things considered, the 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 things that you should do will come up. The things that you should do, all things considered, like sometimes it'll be the case that you really shouldn't do something, even though it's not immoral. But then, like,
Right, right.
right. So the thing that's my view is that I think um immoral is a thick concept, so it only refers to sort of one more limited category of things that you really shouldn't do. And I think, people often recognize this. So there are lots of decisions that are prudentially deeply unwise but it would be weird to describe them as immoral. Like, if you just make a poor financial decision, that's not something you should do, but it would be weird to describe it as immoral because it seems like immorality refers to a specific class of wrongdoing. And so, like, an analogy might be if we came up with a term for, well, actually, no, I don't think an analogy. Nada, the point is just, I don't think I don't think that it's not the case that the only actions that you, all things considered, shouldn't do are the actions that are wrong, because wrong is only
Right.
for a particular category of immoral actions,
I see.
of actions that you shouldn't do, rather.
Let me go back to something you said at the beginning, which is like, you think utilitarianism sort of tells you what you should do, sort of as if you were going to live everybody's life, seriatim, as it were. So you should have concern for all life in the same way that you have concern for what's coming down your particular pipe. Um, and you said that's intuitively what like all of ethics is about. I agree with you that that's definitely part of ethics, but I'm inclined to say that this is just an old classic point that like part of it, another part of ethics is that people are not living each other's lives, right? You have your life to live, I have my life to live, and part of tolerance and respect and rights and so on is sort of recognizing that there's something meddlesome or inappropriate about me trying to maximize your utility, whether you want me to or not. So, I mean, how do you think about that kind of challenge?
So I grant that, yeah. So I don't think it's like a conceptual truth that this is all of what ethics is. I think a it's just a truth about ethics that um that what the right actions are the ones that you would take if you experienced everyone's life and counted everyone's interests equally. Now that doesn't strike me as super obviously true, but it strikes me as
Mhm.
at least sort of plausible enough to make utilitarianism like one of the big options that you should consider, and maybe kind of like the default, absent a strong reason to doubt it. And now regarding the case where you do things that benefit other people, um, I mean, I guess there do seem to be. I think there are sort of like my concern there would be just a practical concern, where I think normally people have a better sense of what's in their own interest than other people, and so there are practical objections to paternalism. But if in fact something would be good for you, um, then it doesn't strike me as as counterintuitive that like if I can benefit you even if you wouldn't want me to, assuming I had perfect information that it would in fact be in your long-term interest, then that would seem worthwhile. One intuition for this is, so it seems like when deciding what things you can do to a person, what matters it more than what they actually consent to is what they would consent to under ideal conditions. So
Mhm.
even if a person is temporarily psychotic and doesn't want to consume some medicine that will save their life because they think it's poison, then we say, no, you can force them to consume the medicine because it's under ideal conditions they would consent to it. But under ideal conditions, a person would rationally consent to things that were prudentially in their self-interest. And so if you think what matters is what the person would consent to under ideal conditions, then um, then you should think that uh, that that you can do things for that are in someone else's interests, even without asking them, assuming you have sufficiently good information about it.
I think that as long as you've got decent enough consent, like for example, you're not experiencing psychosis, you are relevantly informed, then what you actually consent to is more important than what you would consent to under ideal circumstances. I mean, for example, people might have religious objections because they have, I mean, just stipulate a case where someone has an incorrect religious view that leads them to be opposed to, say, transfusions or maybe organ donation, and they refuse consent. I mean, I think that it's really intuitive that we have to defer to people. Like we can't just sort of strap them down to the chair and say, "Well, if you were smarter and thinking more clearly, you would totally agree with this." And one of these days I could be living your life, reincarnated. So I'm kind of, but so I think that you know, uh, it's true that really whacked out consent doesn't count. But as long as it's over a minimal bar, then we feel a strong urge to defer, and rightly so.
I guess I would think of that as being a useful heuristic. So most of the time it makes sense to do this, but I wouldn't think that that would hold in all cases. So
Mhm.
so like I think it, it it normally makes sense to do that because normally people have a better sense of what's in their own interest than third parties, and it's very easy for third parties to justify people with some cock and bull story about how it's benefiting them. But I mean, so just take one specific example. Okay, so and this will maybe get into one of the big objections I have to deontology. So imagine that there are 10 trillion buttons, okay, and each or sorry, more than that, a quadrillion buttons,
Done.
and
Yes.
and each button will very slightly improve your well-being. Uh, and there are aliens. They're in a distant galaxy. Each button that they press only slightly improves your well-being. Um, or actually, no. Let's make it a more vivid case. Let's imagine you're suffering very, very intensely. So you're currently experiencing deeply torturous suffering,
I don't like
and
this
each
case as much, but okay.
yeah, sorry, I know. There's really, the details got much worse for you. Um, so you're experiencing like torture level suffering,
Okay.
and each button that they press only lessens your suffering a tiny, tiny amount. Now, suppose that you have very strong religious objections to each button being pressed, right? So you would really, really strongly not want the button to be pressed. It's written in your holy book that pressing these buttons is an abomination, and those who do it shall be killed. Uh, so you really don't want the button to be pressed, and each button that's pressed only produces a very tiny benefit. It seems like on the deontological view that you're sympathetic to, it would be wrong to press each of the buttons. But then to me, it strikes me as clear that, well, no, it wouldn't actually be wrong to press each of the buttons because, like, assume you never find out about the buttons being pressed. So the effect of pressing the buttons, it just eliminates
Mm.
all of your torturous suffering, doesn't harm anyone else. It strikes me as clearly right that you should press each of the buttons. But if each button being pressed only produces a slight benefit, and you shouldn't violate consent for a slight benefit, then it would seem like on your view it would be wrong to press the button.
That's a very nice point. I mean, I'm inclined to say a couple of things. One is that it's a little bit unclear how aggregation works when it comes to rights. It's to me, it seems like a bit of an unsolved problem. So I mean, clearly, if but second point is that how to put it, rights aren't absolute. So sometimes you can override a right for somebody else's greater good. So, for example, I can't sort of kill one person to save five, but if I need to like borrow your phone and call for help to save my own life, and you're like, sorry, I'm a little bit germophobic, don't touch my phone. Like I can just grab your phone. Um, the classic case would be Feinberg's cabin. So Joel Feinberg imagined a case where you're on a cat, you're hiking in the mountains, blizzard hits, you're gonna die. The only way to survive is to break into somebody's like holiday cabin and burn the furniture for warmth and eat their rations. And I think there's a lot of plausibility in the idea that you do violate the rights of the cabin owner here, as explained by the fact that like assuming you have the money to, you should compensate them afterwards. Um, but it's also clearly not like wrong to infringe the right. So sometimes people talk about infringing a right rather than violating, where violating implies it's wrong, infringing maybe not. Okay, so back to your case. Um,
So it,
just real quick, I should just to tie it together so it doesn't seem like I was dodging the point about aggregation. One thing you could say as a deontologist is that the badness of torture outweighs the right. I have an objection to you pressing that button. I mean, it's not even obvious where that right would come from. It's not like I own the buttons. But even if I did, that right seems like it would get outweighed by torture. Now, if you b- disaggregate the torture into a bunch of tiny little panes and assign each its own button, then it's a kind of unclear whether we should think about all of the decisions to press the buttons as permissible because the whole set would be permissible to make it once, or if separating them somehow actually means that each one is wrong, because there's no kind of collective decision making about the button. So here, I would need to know more about the Society of Button Pressers. But you can see the general strategy here. It's rights aren't absolute, and there's options for how to deal with aggregation.
Yeah. So I think that right. So as you anticipate, like the reason why I had it be a lot of different buttons is because that was intended to address the right is concerned absolute worry. Of course, you would get to press one button to prevent an arbitrarily large amount of torture. But the idea here is that each individual button produces only a very, very tiny amount of agony reduction. And so then on deontology, it's hard to see why you could do it. Now you were suggesting, well, maybe you could say that it's permissible because the the actions like as a whole, the actions considered collectively are permissible. But then I guess I'm not so sure why it's not obvious to me on deontology why the actions together are taken as a whole are permissible. And I think there are two reasons to be skeptical of this. The first one is I'm skeptical of your rationale for it, which was you were saying because well, it prevents a very large number of tortures. But that's if you take together the collective effects. But then if you take together the collective effects, then you have to take together all the collective different rights violations. Right. So if you do 100 million things, each of which violate rights, even if they collectively produce a substantial positive effect, a deontologist will still not generally be in favor of that. And the second reason is so just imagine now instead that rather than one person pressing all the buttons, so imagine that um so imagine just coming across any one of the individual buttons, right? Where just someone is experiencing some amount of agony, they have a very, very strong religious objection to pressing the button. But the button will lessen their agony by a tiny and imperceptible amount. Seems like if you're a deontologist, you'd say, well, it would be wrong to press the button. But each individual button would be wrong to press. That like it let's say just to make the math easy, let's say they start at 10 billion they start at 10 billion units of suffering, and each button reduces their suffering by 1 unit.
Yeah.
So if a person's at 10 billion units of suffering, it's wrong to press a button that reduces their suffering by 1 unit. Person's at 10 billion minus 1 units of suffering, it's wrong to press a button that reduces it by 1 unit. And so then it seems like taking every single one of these actions collectively, well, that would be even more wrong. You're doing a range of things that are wrong, and it's not clear why the addition, like when deciding whether to press each of the individual buttons, it does not seem relevant how many buttons you've pressed in the past or how many buttons you've pressed or how many buttons you will press in the future in ways that are totally unrelated uh to the like it's not like you can only press the future buttons if you press this button. um so that would be
Yeah.
kind of the basic worry.
So I'm actually kind of open to the idea that what you should do may depend on what you've done. Not just in the benign sense that, if I've gotten into the car, I should put on the seatbelt, but like whether I've arrived at a certain decision via another decision might affect the rationality of what I do next. So I mean, there's worries about things like the sunk cost fallacy, but I've come to think that unless you're a real monist, where you really think that there's just a ranking of all the best outcomes, like you can assign numbers and you just go for the big number. Once you've got funky trade-offs where it's not clear how to make it, then it's not fully transitive. Like, there's a career in the arts, there's a career in business. Neither's better than the other. But actually, if you made like $5 more a year in business, that still wouldn't quite beat the career in arts. They'd still be on par or something like this, or maybe incompletely ranked. Whenever you've got this kind of stuff, it's possible, I think, to have what is sometimes called derisively by decision theorists, temporal inconsistency or dynamic inconsistency. So just to use that example, um, uh, imagine I'm deciding between the career in the arts and the career in business, right? And I first pick, you know, uh, I can either do A, B, or like B plus, which is business with like a little extra money. And let's suppose that, neither of the B's beats A and vice versa. Um, if I first pick business rather than art, I have to pick business with the sweetener, with the little extra money. Otherwise, I'm just totally irrational. But suppose I first pick, okay, I'm not going to take the sweetened business option. Now what? Well, now my two options left are career in arts or the slightly less good career in business. And this might seem artificial, but this stuff happens all the time. You put a down payment on something, you maybe move, but you don't yet take a job. You start walking towards one restaurant, but you kind of still have the option to go to, walk in the opposite direction to another. It's just a little longer now. So like this is actually very, very, very common. Um, but now suppose it's down to arts versus the unsweetened business option. It seems to me like if that were just the option in the beginning that I was left with, either would be fine. But I have the kind of view that you should resolutely stick to a path through the options if you can. So it would be irrational to pick that business option, even though that expresses a kind of dynamic inconsistency.
Yeah,
Um,
so I'm in favor of being dynamically consistent, and I think that actually I
Ramones
draw.
be monist.
Yeah, I take this to illustrate a somewhat different principle, which is I just take this to illustrate that you shouldn't have incomplete preferences, where where you prefer A plus to A, but then don't have, but then are indifferent between both A plus and B and A.
It's like you shouldn't fear death. Like you shouldn't be human. Like it's just the human condition to have incomplete preferences. I mean, I don't
But
think there's too many great novels about this, but
people do have lots of these preferences, but I think these preferences are a hallmark of their rationality. So I think it's also true. It's also true that
you
lots of
only have
people.
limited time. So,
All right.
Tyler Cowen once told me he thought that like intransitive or incomplete preferences is like preferences that you just haven't gotten around to ironing out yet. But you only have limited amount of time to figure out your priorities in life, and especially because there might be things like, what do you think are the absolute best like recipes that you've ever looked at? It's like you'd be a fool to spend your time thinking about that stuff.
Right. Right.
Uh,
I agree with the person whose name I'm blanking on, who
oh,
that you just
Cowen?
yeah,
Yeah,
the one
Tyler
the one.
Cowen. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, wait. Oh, I didn't hear you say Tyler Cowen. Sorry. Yeah,
No,
but
I once got burritos with Tyler Cowen, and
wow.
which was not a great idea. This is not a good place to get Mexican food, North Carolina. But T Tyler, I'll just tell this quick story because it's kind of funny. Tyler, he just has this like weird, like super lust for life. So we went to the burrito place. He's this economist and blogger, by the way. For people who haven't heard of Tyler Cowen. And so we go to Car Burritos down the street, which is like a perfectly, mid-tier burrito place. And there's some like young guy at the counter. Is like, "Hey, can I take your order?" And he's like, "I would like the platonic form of the burrito, please." and and they're like, you know, uh, "What kind of salsa?" It's like, "Go with Play-Doh." So I do kind of admire the desire to like have fully complete preferences and just like pick the
Right.
platonic form every time. But I don't I can't do it. That's not me.
Yeah. So I agree that like in practice as a fallible agent, you will very often have incomplete and intransitive preferences, and you shouldn't spend your time ironing those out when you could spend your time helping shrimp. Um.
Yes.
Uh. But yeah. But I guess so. In that case, I think just what you should do, like in practice, what you should do is like often it'll make sense to just pre-commit to whatever you decided so that you stop wasting time on the decision.
Yeah.
But I think just sort of like what I think an ideal decision maker would have complete and transitive preferences, and um, that uh, that at and when you're if you're in the process of deciding which thing to do, maybe it makes sense to sort of at some point just stop thinking about a decision because exactly which restaurant you go to isn't that important.
Right.
But when you're deciding, it seems like you should just take the option that you find to be best. Um, rather than which one you've resolutely pre-committed to. But I guess so. So in the button press case, so now let's imagine that rather than you pressing each of the buttons, now imagine that everyone on Earth can press one of the buttons. And for each person if everyone on Earth presses the button, the person suffering will drop down to near zero. Do you think so? You're one of the people on Earth. Should you press the button?
This is going to sound a little bit unsatisfying, maybe, but I actually think there's two fundamentally different ways to ask that question. I think you can approach these questions through the lens of individual rationality. Should I press the button? In which case, I don't think I should. Yeah. They have a religious objection. It's a big deal to them. We're just supposing for hypothesis they have a right. We're also supposing for hypothesis it would make basically no difference to their life whether I press the button. So it's fine. But then there's another point of view that kind of pops up all over the history of ethics in funny places and only in fits and starts until the 20th century, which is what some call the plural point of view, what the economist Tom Schelling calls strategic point of view, where you're thinking about interpersonally, what are we going to do? I think, what are we going to do? We, the citizens of Earth with our buttons. Then rather than just thinking, what does my button add? I think, well, it's actually very similar to Kantianism in some ways. What if everybody did what I'm doing? But instead of sort of projecting my individual choice onto everybody, a law for all rational agents in Kant's jargon, what I'm doing is kind of there's a meeting of all of our minds as we think about what to do together. I mean, can I give you one example of this just to prove it's a real thing? And then I think we should actually look at a couple of questions that have emerged in the chat. Like, one's about factory farming, so I know you'll like that. So here's an example, Schelling's example. Imagine that you and I find ourselves in the jungle. Our helicopter malfunctioned and we've landed, and all we've got are a couple of maps.
Well, for either of us,
It's rough, but at least we know that we each have the same map. Okay, and the map looks like this. I'll just draw it. Why not? Okay, map looks like this. There's a tree. There's a river. There's another river. And this river has two bridges. Well, this river has one bridge. Please hold your applause. But there's a question, where should we meet? Now, if I'm thinking of this from the point of view of individual rationality, it's just totally unobvious where we should meet. It just depends. I'd have to think about my probabilities. Like, where is Matthew going to think that we're meeting? And I would say, like, those are basically undefined unless I have some special info. But if we think about this strategically, like, where would you meet me if you had to pick a place? Either a tree or a bridge.
I'd meet you at that squiggle in the middle.
Oh, really? Oh, I should have drawn more trees. That's a reasonable one. I mean, presumably you pick the middle because it's like salient, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So usually you pick something salient. So either like the bridge with one, or the river with one bridge, or something in the middle. But salience is not something that matters from the point of view of individual rationality. It is from the point of view of collective rationality. Like, that's how we kind of coordinate on norms. So if we were thinking about it collectively, I think we would think the outcome of button pressing is torture. Whereas if we're thinking individually, we think, I'm not going to make a difference. Who gives a shit? So that's how I would approach it.
Yeah. So I guess I think I'm sorry. We can get to chat. I just want to say something.
You should defend yourself.
So I think the difference I would between those cases is there are lots of cases where there's a perfectly defensible sense of collective rationality where there are two actions A and B, and whether you should take each of the actions will depend on whether you should take the other action, right? So simple case, there are two buttons. If you press one but not the other, the world explodes. And if you press both, then peace on earth is ushered. Okay. Yeah. So obviously, whether you should press one will depend on whether you're likely to press the other.
Yeah.
The difference is, I think in this case, what it looks like is happening is that you have actions which are each individually wrong to do, um, for each of the individual people who will do them. But then as a whole, you should want them all to happen, right? So let's just say we're going in order, right? So you just line everyone up in order, and one person's going to push the button. So there's person one, he presses his button first. Person two, she presses her button second, and so on. Okay.
Yeah.
So on your view, you're person 398, you shouldn't press the button, right? And person one shouldn't press the button, and person two shouldn't press the button. Acting as individuals, assuming their actions are not correlated, they should not press the button. Okay. So pressing the button would be morally wrong. Okay. So, but now person one, their finger twitches, so they accidentally press it. And what do you know? Person two, their finger also twitches, so that they accidentally press it. This vast coincidence keeps going down the line so that they all press it. It seems like the endpoint is, well, it's really great that all these people's fingers twitched so that they did the wrong thing, and third parties should hope for that outcome. And then it's like, well, no, it shouldn't be a great thing that everyone does actions that are wrong, nor should you want everyone to do wrong actions. And it shouldn't be fortunate if people accidentally, as a result of a finger twitch, do the wrong action. And I don't think that there's any analog there. I don't think that there's any analog that can be given where, like, it seems like each of the individual actions are wrong, considered individually. I don't think that there's a way to construct the bridge case in a way that is analogous
Yeah,
to
it's not a case of aggregation. Yeah.
Yeah.
But just so you know how my people see these things, like I think it's a very natural utilitarian thing to say that, like, who could possibly hope for a wrong action? But that's because you're thinking that what we hope for is good results, and so action must also aim at good results. But I think it's very common for, like, following the rules to sometimes lead to bad things, but it's still the honorable or correct thing to do. I mean, just another simple example that you might agree with. I pressed this one on Richard a little bit. Is I think, like, norms for attitudes are very clear. Not everybody agrees with this. Susanna Reinhardt at Harvard doesn't, but I think a lot of people agree that norms for attitudes are backwards looking. It's like you should not believe that you know, tariffs will promote economic growth. Massive tariffs will promote, even if you would get a nice job in the administration, if you did believe that. And let's suppose, that's a really good outcome for you. I think that that's how I feel about a lot of wrong actions. The belief is wrong to hold because it doesn't fit the evidence, despite all the good consequences. Violating somebody's rights is wrong, even if it has pretty good consequences.
Yeah, right. So I guess right. So I on the kind of like in the UV Richard dispute, I broadly agree with Richard about this, but I don't think it assumes a distinctly consequentialist way of thinking. So, like, there's a very natural way of thinking about it if you're a deontologist, where you think that not only should you not kill one person and harvest their organs to save five, a moral third party ought to hope that you wouldn't kill one person and harvest their organs to save five, because it's wrong. You shouldn't hope that people do the wrong thing. God shouldn't be sitting in heaven thinking, "Oh, I really want this doctor to do this egregiously evil thing." Um, I mean, it strikes me as strange that you would hope that people would do wrong, and the ideally fitting attitudes would be you want the person to do the wrong thing. Now,
I think it's so normal. It's
now,
so
well,
normal in strategic
well,
situations, especially. Like,
well. So
you know,
I
I
grant
hope our
them,
negotiator is ruthless. And
but but
things like that.
maybe you hope they're ruthless, but you don't. But you wouldn't say, "I hope the negotiator does things that are morally wrong." It would seem weird to say my impartial and ideal judgment is that the negotiator does things that are morally wrong. And one reason why it strikes me as really strange um to think this is that there seem to be all sorts of other attitudes that are tied up, all sorts of other attitudes and actions that are tied up with what you hope for, that um that the deontologist seems to have to think something weird about. So, for example, should we have a law against killing one person to save multiple. Well, it seems like I mean, well, in practice we should, right?
Yeah, yeah, okay, good. Well, we're on the same page. Hold on, I'm
Right.
gonna heart that.
But
You get a couple of hearts from me.
right. But now imagine like some sort of ideal scenario where in fact the consequences of having a law like that would be bad. Where basically
Yeah,
like that the only like imagine you're sort of in a society of very short-lived creatures who like
right.
they know the legal system, but it doesn't have any long-term effects on their decisions because they forget after 5 seconds how many instances of murders for greater well-being are brought about, something along those lines. So then in that case, should you have the law? What seems like a very natural thing to think is, well, you should have the law because it deters the wrong action of killing one person to save multiple people. But if in fact you ought to, but if in fact you should want people to kill one person to save multiple people, even if you shouldn't do it, then it's like, well, if you really hope that something happens, if it's sort of like you're not allowed to do it morally, but you should want it to happen, well, then you certainly shouldn't deter it. Or take another judgment that's bound up with it. Um, it seems like if a person's going to do a something that's seriously wrong, you should persuade them out of it, right? So imagine you could be really persuasive to your. So imagine your utilitarian friend says, "I'm about to kill one person and save five." Um, and or let's make it not your friend, just so no special obligation. Some stranger says, "I'm going to kill one person to save five." But they say, "Look, you're a philosophy professor. You've no doubt thought about this question more than I have. You've written about supererogation. I don't even know what that is. My judgment can't be trusted. So, Daniel, what do you think I should do?" It seems like, on your view, it seems like if someone comes to you and says, "I'm about to do a seriously immoral thing, uh, sh- should I not do it?" It seems like you should try to talk them out of it. But if all things considered, what your judgment should be is that you want them to do it, it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't try to talk. Then it seems weird that you should try to talk them out of it. You should like be trying to talk them out of it, but secretly hoping that you don't succeed. Or to give a last judgment that seems wrapped
Yeah,
up
yeah,
with it. Think about which actions you should prevent. Right. So imagine that currently there's sort of like a scalpel in a room, and it's going to be used by some future serial killer by some future person to kill one person and save five. But you can right now take the scalpel out of the room so that the killer is not able to perform that action. Um, it seems like if it's wrong for them to do it, it seems like then you should remove the scalpel. But if on your view, you should want them to do it, all things considered, you should hope that they do it. And it's like, well, if all things considered, you should hope that a person performs some action. You shouldn't uh, you shouldn't prevent them preemptively from performing that action. Um, so
yeah.
overall, yeah, it strikes me as making deontology super weird.
All of those cases involve a kind of unity that I just don't really see morality or ethics more broadly as having. I mean, one distinction that helps with some of the cases is between what would I do in your shoes and what do I hope that you'll do, no, recognizing that you're not me and that I'm not the one making the decision, right? So I, I think it's wrong to violate rights, but and so if I were in your shoes and you were deciding whether to violate one person's rights to save five lives, I wouldn't do it. And if you're asking what's the correct thing to do, I would say, well, not to kill. But hoping is a little bit ambiguous between like what do I think would be the correct thing to do versus what outcome would I welcome? And you know, basically what I think is like it's open to the deontologist to have the view that the outcome you should welcome is a good outcome, but you don't want any part, but nobody's agency can bring it about because that violates the rights. And that's exactly analogous to the belief case as the utilitarian should analyze it. So I don't think this is only deontology that has this problem. So if I say, hey, look, if I just believe this absolute terrible falsehood, I'll get rewarded, by the propagandists or by, this whimsical neuroscientist or whatever. I say, what should I believe? I think, the correct answer is, well, you should believe in accordance with the evidence, however inconvenient. But obviously, if the results are going to be good, then you, the utilitarian, should sort of try to get me to believe the thing that you think I shouldn't believe. That's a kind of disunity that you see between the norms of action and the norms of belief. I think that same disunity applies within action to the actions that are aimed at creating better outcomes and the actions that are attempting to make good on what we owe to other people and to
Yeah,
ourselves. I should say, yeah, I'm writing a book, What We Owe to Ourselves. I feel like I should plug it, but nothing
yeah,
exists yet.
yeah. So,
Just like Google
I,
Drive.
I
Wait, wait.
guess,
Should we go to the chat? I'm sorry to get
yeah,
myself
yeah.
for last
Sorry, yeah.
week, but
Let's do it.
you know,
Sorry, I'm trying to set up my camera so it's not at an awkward angle now that I have to have it plugged in. Okay, okay.
so
I think
the first comment that I saw was from Kyle Starr. He said, I dislike prioritizing agency, like Kant does, over utility, because this gives the power to those smart enough to use agency the ability to prioritize themselves over something like factory farming, where the animals can't utilize their agency. Yeah, I think that's nice. We haven't really talked about agency versus utility in quite those terms, but what do you think about that?
I'm not sure I quite get the point.
I think it's something
Actually,
like
let
this.
me be more precise. I don't get the point. This is not
uh,
something I'm uncertain about.
that's hilarious. I think it's something like this. If you think that what matters isn't just utility, like where that is something like the ability to experience uh, pleasure versus pain, that's having positive versus negative utility. Um, if you believe that morality also involves agency, particularly like rational agency, where maybe you have to be able to not just choose on the basis of reasons, but to kind of reflect on your reasons, like, is this a good idea? Uh, Then those of us that are uh, blessed with this excellent ability might look upon the benighted other creatures of the world as lesser beings, right? We're the ones that have rationality, agency, humanity, as Kant called it. And then we look at the factory farmed shrimp and so on, and we think, sucks to suck, too bad you don't have the same moral status as us. I think that's Kyle's worry. So he says
Oh,
because he doesn't want us to neglect the shrimp and other factory farmed creatures. He doesn't like prioritizing rational agency.
I think even if you're a deontologist, you should clearly think that well-being is, as you've said, one of the things that matters, even if not
Right.
the only thing. And so you won't say that shrimp don't matter at all because they don't have agency. You'll say that shrimp, like maybe you'll think you get if shrimp don't have agency of the right sort, maybe then you get to push the fat shrimp off a bridge to save the five guinea shrimp. But you won't think that you get to put, or it's like
The jumbo
there's like
shrimp.
you get or like you get to push the shrimp off the big fat crab off to like save the like five mini crabs or something. Um, yeah.
Yeah, no. So actually, Michael Thompson somewhere. He's this like legendary eccentric philosopher at Pittsburgh. Um, which come to think of it is itself a kind of legendary eccentric department. But anyway, uh, Thompson talks about deontology as kind of like, there being basically a trolley problem test, right? Like, uh, I don't think paintings have rights. I'm happy with burning one painting to save five. Shrimp, horses, cats. I'm a little bit unclear. I think I'm pretty cool with you know killing the jumbo shrimp to save the five mini shrimp. But for cats and pigs and so on, I don't know. I mean, I'm actually kind of drawn to to the idea that many non-human animals have agency, and that this is, although they don't have the same kind of agency that we do, they may not be able to reflect on themselves in the same way. Um, we think that other people's inclinations and desires and actions matter, and that there's some basic presumption we don't interfere. Similarly, I feel something kind of similar about animals. It's different with wild animals um, for complicated reasons, but I'm not against the idea that there's like a little junior deontology that cats and pigs get to enjoy.
Yeah. So your view on ethics can be summarized as utilitarianism for shrimp, some ambiguous mix between utilitarianism and deontology for horses, and deontology for people.
That's it exactly.
I think that should be sort of like your blog slogan, That would be very catchy. Um,
This is why you have the clicks, my friend.
well,
Uh,
I think your clicks per month are similarly high to mine. I've just been blogging for longer. Um,
ah, I, it's kind of interesting. Uh, People, if anyone else here has written on Substack before, you know that you get an absolutely gobsmacking amount of data on everything that you post, and there's all these shiny numbers, and suddenly there's a natural kind of affordance of like, oh, I should make line go up. Um, but I feel like I'm trying to do something with the blog, which is a bit unusual. Like, I don't know, like I'm kind of curious and just seeing how people react to the stuff that I wanted to write anyway. Um, and maybe it's because I'm burned out from being, a teenager who was it was like one of the social media guinea pigs, you know? Um, but I feel weirdly like kind of, uh, I don't care what everybody on Substack thinks. I'm gonna talk about deontology and see what they like. Uh, but anyway, should we go to Silas next?
Yes.
Isn't it just a matter of whether the anti-button religion cares about individual button presses? Pushing 1,000 buttons is 1,000 times worse according to them, regardless of how good the button otherwise is. That would explain the strangeness in aggregation. Um, right. I, I mean,
Silas walked it back. He thinks he misunderstood the case.
okay,
Why?
okay, okay. We're good, we're good. And then I think, uh, Ibrahim Dagger has one. Uh, he says what about other cases that have this structure? He mentions climate change plus lollipops. Actually, let me give you one example. I wonder what you think about this. Here's a case from Brian Hedden, in a paper called Consequentialism and Collective Action that came out in
Is
Ethics.
he a hedonist?
Somehow I never heard that one before. Um, he's about to go back to the mothership. He's going back to MIT to do like AI stuff, algorithm stuff, plus ethics. So keep an eye on him. He's awesome. So okay, so with this he has his case. So a lot of utilitarians deal with collective action problems by analyzing them as triggering cases. So like famously, the utilitarian case against eating meat was considered very weak for a long time because how much of a difference to the factory farms are you going to make if you just buy a chicken sandwich versus buying some broccoli? Similarly, climate change, like, of course, it's catastrophic by utilitarian lights if like growth is massively slowed down relative to what it would have been. Uh,
Pending
and if it,
further research on insect welfare, on its impacts on insects, which makes it clear. But I think it's negative in expectation, but it's somewhat of
suppose you think it's super negative in expectation, there's still
yeah.
this worry of like, one bit of carbon in the air surely isn't going to make a difference, or voting, and so on and so forth. So there's all these cases where collective actions seem important to contribute to, but it's not clear how the utility is supposed to be significant if it's just one individual action. And so the classic move, Shelley Kagan, I think, gets credit for this, is say that, well, they're really just triggering cases. So what's going on is, um, after a certain point at the chicken shop, you know, if you buy one sandwich, you might have no effect on how many chickens the shop buys. But if you buy the triggering chicken, the 36 chicken or whatever it is, the one that makes them say, "Oh, we got to restock," then you actually like you don't just cause them to buy one additional chicken, you cause them to buy like 36 or whatever it is. Um, so just supposing for simplicity, every 36 they restock. So although it's probably true that when you buy a chicken sandwich, it will have no effect, there's a chance that it will have a big effect. And so that's supposed to explain why um, you should not pollute and you should not eat meat and you should go vote. It's because there's a chance that you'll make a big difference, even though you probably won't make any. Okay, here's what Hedden says. Hedden says there's some cases where you just can't analyze it as a triggering case. Let's just imagine that there's some really wonderful benefit that everybody will receive if infinitely many of us chip in. If infinitely many of us pay $1, everybody gets $10, um, or the equivalent in some good. Uh, but if only finitely many of us pay, then nobody gets anything in return. So it seems like each collectively, you should hope that everybody, or at least an infinite subset of people, pay that price. That everybody's better off, right? But each person knows I can't possibly make the difference because if infinitely many people are giving, then no, you don't need to add anybody to that. It's already infinite. If only finitely many people are giving, then you can't turn that finite number of gifts into an infinite number. You're just a finite addition. So what Hedden shows is that this collective action problem uh, is actually deeply difficult for consequentialists to deal with, unless you appeal to the classic infinity is weird and then move on. But as long as infinity is on the table, which I think it should be,
I mean, I
then
guess I basically think I buy the infinity is weird response. I basically think counterexamples involving infinity are fake and can be ignored. The infinite and the finite are separate and non-overlapping magisteria. And like, for example, in infinite cases, it's just demonstrably the case that so long as you think shifting people around without changing anyone's welfare doesn't make the world better, then you have to think um, that uh, uh, that um, that a world where every galaxy has a million miserable people and one happy person is no better than a world where every galaxy has a million miserable people and one happy person.
yeah.
And so I think counterexamples involving infinite numbers of people are very suspicious. The other thing, sorry, let me think through this
No, you're
case.
totally
Okay,
fine.
so
You're totally fine.
yeah, the idea is so
So individually, rationally, it seems like it'd be wrong to give your money because it makes no difference. You're just inflicting pain on yourself, and there's no chance that you'll decisively change things for the better. And yet, if everybody does that, then everybody loses. So that's a case where I'm suggesting by your lights, you run into the same problem you were trying to stick me with. You were trying to say that the deontologists are kooky for hoping that people do things individually wrong. But here's a case where even the consequentialists should want things that are individually wrong
right,
to be done.
yeah, this is an interesting case. Um,
But infinity is
yeah,
weird is a perfectly legitimate response.
yeah. Um, like I guess this strikes me as like a little bit like some causal finitist cases where it's like because there's no first member, it's like there's um like I basically think this principle only applies to finite cases because in infinite cases there might be no like the intuition is supposed to be like if it's wrong to take some sequence of actions, um if you don't want the sequence of actions to be taken, it's like what point do you want like like um let's say there are 100 actions which together are taken and that's a good and that's a good thing. Sorry, good thing. That's a good thing. Um, uh, then there's a question of just like, okay, well, it seems like there has to be at least one of the actions that's good. Like, how many do you want to take? Well, if you want the first action to be taken and the second one and the third one and so on, then it seems like you like there's no threshold at which you want the action. Um, like it seemed like there has to be at least one of the actions that you want to take. But if you have an infinite case, then there's no individual case that is contributory to the action being bad. And so, yeah, so I think this is broadly a case where just infinity is weird would be my response, and you should only have the principle generalized to finite cases. But I will have to think a bit more about that case. But
Because deontologists can say once X is weird is on the table, then I can say that all kinds of cases are weird, right?
let's see. Wait, can't so what can you give this response where you say, look, um, so there's no individual person who um well actually I think this is analogous to some other cases where infinites are weird, right? So a world that has infinite well-off people and infinite badly off people is neither good nor bad. Assume that there are reasons to think that, but I think that's very plausible, right? And so then imagine creating one galaxy with 10 happy people and one unhappy person. Seems like creating that one galaxy is good. Creating a second galaxy like that is good. For any number n, creating n galaxies is better than creating n minus one galaxies. But creating infinite galaxies like that is neither good nor bad.
Right, right. I mean, what we're getting at is the kind of inaccessibility of countable infinity, where it just has certain emergent properties that you don't get from duplicating or triplicating uh, finite sets of things. But this makes it very useful for illustrating and teasing out some of our own ethical intuitions. Well, so actually, let me hit you with. Have
But
you heard of this?
I think the weirdness comes from the math, not from anything weird about ethics. Like it's a weird
That's legit.
mathematical feature
That's fair.
that you can have some very large number of things that for any number n things happening is better than n minus one things happening. But
Yes,
infinite, but when n is infinity, then that's not better than when any finite number of the things happen. Like that just seems like a weird mathematical property of infinity. It's not specific to ethics. You'll get similar
yeah.
it'll just be
Oh yeah,
true of
yeah.
like of pebbles, like
Right.
you'll have a if there you'll have more black pebbles than white pebbles if you have one galaxy with 10 black pebbles and one white pebble. You have more pebbles. You have an even greater preponderance of black pebbles over white pebbles if you have two galaxies like that, more of three galaxies like that. But if you have infinite galaxies like that, then it's the same number because you could just
Absolutely.
and yeah rearrange them. Sorry, yeah. Um,
No, 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 no. That's a fantastic illustration. So I want to pivot. So I think that there's so to me the most interesting takeaway from thinking about infinite ethics is actually a way of interpreting utilitarianism even in finite cases. So I just want to see what you think about this. So I think there's like two very different approaches to utilitarianism. On one, what matters is utility. On the other, what matters are people, non-human animals, or maybe just time slices of them. But the beings that have the utility versus the utility itself. So like you know total utilitarians who think that what matters is maximizing the amount of net happiness. You know, they care about the quantity of stuff, right? Whereas others like neoclassical economists, ones who didn't adjudicate trade-offs. I can't tell you whether it's good to take $5 from the billionaire and give it to the poorest person in society, but they're happy to say that win-wins are good. So the neoclassical economists, um, they are also kind of utilitarian, but they're person-centric. They don't deal with this total amount and try to maximize it. Uh, but of course, you can also be person-centric and allow for trade-offs. I'm just giving us a real historical example. Okay, so here here's a case that really beautifully brings out the difference between the two. Uh, it dates back to James Cain's Sum of Suffering from 1995, but this is the version that's been circulating around. I believe John Broome came up with it. So
sphere. Okay.
the sphere of suffering. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
So you may know this case. Here's the Broome version. So there's two afterlives, and I want you to pick which one you think is better. Afterlife one, there's infinitely many of us, person one, two, three, and so on. And we all start off in heaven. And then on day one, person one goes down to hell for the rest of time. Person two goes down on day two for the rest of time, and so on. So that is afterlife one. Afterlife two is the opposite. Everybody starts off in hell. And on day one, person one ascends to heaven and stays there for the rest of the time. Day two, person two, and so on and so forth. So, just out of curiosity, which strikes you as the better afterlife?
Yeah. So I think the afterlife that's better is the one where everyone starts in uh the one where everyone starts in heaven and then goes to hell. And I broadly agree with your takeaway here that um that infinite ethics does give you a strong reason to prefer this person-centric account of utilitarianism to the aggregate utility-centric account of utilitarianism.
Yeah.
Um,
So just to be clear, but you like the aggregate centric version,
no,
is
no,
what you're saying.
I like I'm on Team Richard here.
Oh,
I like the person-centric view.
but then you probably want to say that it's better to start off. It's easy to mix these up verbally, but so if everybody
Sorry,
starts off in heaven,
I'm in the one
then
where everyone starts out in hell.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, good, good. I'm with you. I'm with you. Because everyone
Yeah,
starts off in
yeah.
hell. At every day, there's an infinite amount of suffering. Like, let's just say every day in hell sucks to degree one. just a finite amount. And every day in heaven's awesome to degree one. Then you have infinite suffering every day because only finitely many people have made it to heaven. Uh, but for each person, their life is infinitely good because person one spends only one day sucking in heaven and the rest is amazing. Person N spends only N days in hell and the rest is amazing and so on. Whereas it's the opposite if everyone starts in heaven, where every day is infinitely good, but every person's life is infinitely bad. So I mean, I just found that case completely mind blowing, and it really converted me to Richard Yetter chapelology when it comes to, you know, should utility be person centric or well, actually, so I say this. I actually think Richard's view is almost like trying to capture the person-centric view via the total view, because what he thinks is important is the utility itself, but he thinks that like Matthew Adelson utility is just different stuff than Daniel Muñoz utility. So I mean, I have a long unpublished slash unwritten reply to Richard called Value Collectibles, where he does think that like what matters is the stuff, but he just thinks that like, you know, it's almost like putting wine in a nice collectible bottle or something. Um, where he thinks that like your pleasure matters because it's different in kind from mine, but it's not that he thinks you matter. It's just that
Well, I don't know. I think there's a
Matthew-ish
sense
utility matters.
like there. I think he thinks where like it's like my utility matters because I matter. Where it's like it,
Okay, that's person-centric. That part's person-centric.
yeah, and so yeah, I broadly agree with that. It's what I actually like a year or two ago. I sent Richard an email about this, like like a very similar point. But yeah, and I agree that I think infinite ethics has this interesting takeaway. Um, yeah, where I think there are lots of cases where it doesn't seem like the total grows, but nonetheless, there have been some improvements for particular people. Um, and so uh, and so that and it seems like the way to make sense of that is to say, well, what you care about is their individual people and their lives going well, not about the sum. It just happens to be the case that for each individual person, you care about their life going well, and you care about them equally between any two people. And so, in the aggregate, you want things to go as well as
Right.
possible.
Yeah. So
I
let me
I do have an
go ahead.
objection to raise to deontology, one that convinces me a lot. But
That's what
if
I was
there's
actually going to ask you about. I was going to say, hit me with the best you got. Let's do it.
okay, um, so I guess I mean there are kind of a number, but I'll tell you my favorite, the one that
Great.
that moved me the most. So, are you familiar with the suitcases case?
So, yes, this is from Casper Hare, who was the third person on my old dissertation committee. And
Yeah,
I told him I was going to write my dissertation on rights. He's like, "Oh, what if there's five people in suitcases and then another on a footbridge in a suitcase?" And I was like, the sheer velocity with which he gave me this bizarre case, and he really thinks this destroys deontology. So, sand. Oh my God, exactly, Abraham. But sorry, I'm interrupting. Hit me with the suitcases.
yeah, yeah. I'm with Casper Hare. Okay, so the idea is imagine that there are two. So what? Okay, first imagine that there are that there are uh that there are so there are six people. Let's just give them names: one, two, three, four, five, and six, and they're each in suitcases, and you don't know who's where. Okay, so like one of them is on top of a bridge, five of them are on the bottom of a bridge. A train's coming; it's going to stop the one on the bottom of the bridge. You can push whoever's at the top of the bridge off the bridge to save the lives of the five people on the bottom of the bridge. And the question is, in that case, should you push the bridge? I mean, sorry, not the bridge. Or should you push the person off the top of the bridge? I think basically, I think in this case, um, for complicated reasons, I think whatever you say about this case poses a big problem for deontology. I think there are arguments that establish that, first of all, that you definitely should push the person in this case who's on top of the bridge where you don't know who they are. And second, um, that uh, that if you should push the person on top of the bridge, then you should in the suitcase. Then in the case where the people are not in suitcases, you should push the person. But yeah, so I guess so first, what do you think about this case?
I think it totally depends on actual consent. So this is my big take on like a lot of the literature around, you know, killing, letting die, and uncertainty, especially in like these multi-person cases. Uh, is I think that often the setup is very clear, except for what did people really consent to? So if
Right.
everyone
Okay.
in the
You
suit,
can't hear what the people consented to because they're in the suitcase.
well, that makes it different, right? I mean, like we said earlier, if somebody's unable to give consent, perhaps because they're psychotic or they're totally unaware of what's happening to them, then sort of deontology dips out a little bit, where it's a little bit unclear what to do. Often we just refer to like, okay, well, what would they do if they knew enough and were able to consent? And so in that case, I think, yeah, like if you don't know what they would consent to, but you know it's in everybody's expected interest to to do this, you should do it. Um, so I mean,
Okay. Yep.
if you were to hear from imagine Casper imagines there's a radio. So imagine that you're hearing the radio and they're all saying, "Please, please push. We each want to survive, and we understand that if you kill one of us to save five of us, I mean, we don't know who's who, but we all like this plan." I'm kind of inclined to say that even that's permissible, but of course there's a lot of kind of like social taboos around killing, rightly so. So I think like, it would be some maybe legally questionable, but I think in that case it's acceptable. But then the tricky case is what if they say no, right? So they say, look, none of us wants to live by virtue of one of us having died. We understand the risks to each of our lives. We don't want you to intervene. Then I think you actually can't take this into your own hands and push the one. I think, they'll look back and say like, I was murdered. Well, sorry, they won't look back, but everybody will look back and
People
realize that there
rarely
was.
look back and say, I was murdered.
Sorry, depending on your view of the afterlife, they may look down and say, "I was murdered. Now I have to spend n days in heaven before infinitely many days in hell." Um, but yeah, that's how I think about that case. I think it really bothered me for a long time, and then I became consent pilled, and I just think actual consent really explains it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. But sorry. So in the case where you can't hear from them, then you think you should do it because it's in all of their interest, right?
It's a little unclear. I think it like depends on what background information you have about them. But if all you have to go on is that it's in everybody's expected interests, then I think you presume that they probably would all want you to do it, that they would all consent to it, so then you do it. But it's all kind of provisional when you
Okay.
don't have actual consent.
Okay. So I think right. So so I think there are reasons to think this is wrong. So let me give let's see. So one reason to think this is wrong is that I think it becomes difficult to see how much information you have to have in order for it to be wrong to kill them. Right. So now
See
let's
your point.
imagine um so now let's imagine a different case. Right. So there are six people on the track, you know, one person on top, five on the bottom, but they're all blindfolded. Okay. So they don't know where they are, but you know where each of them are. In this case, it seems like on deontology, it would be wrong to push the person off the top of the bridge, off to save five people. But it's like, um, even or if the people are sleeping or something. Like if you know who you're killing, then you don't get to do it to save five. But then the worry is, well, the different you knowing a person comes in degrees, right? You never absolutely know someone. You just know an increasingly large number of things about them. Right. So okay. So if the person's in the suitcase and you can't see who they are, then then it's wrong to push them. But if you see who they are, then sorry, if you don't see who they are, then you should push them. If you do see who they are, then you shouldn't push them. But now to give a funny example from Casper Hare, now imagine all you see their big fleshy ear sort of hanging out of one of the flaps. Right. Now do you get to do it? Well, what if you learn the second letter of their name? What
Yeah.
if you sort of like get a very low resolution photograph of them that's very unclear? It seems utterly bizarre that there's some like critical threshold at which you have to know stuff where it's like, okay, only after you know this amount do you get to do it. And to be clear, the challenge is not that like this is not like a sorties case. It's not like you have to tell me the exact amount.
Or
It's
is
that
it?
it seems utterly. Oh, okay. Well, now it seems utterly bizarre that there would be an amount. It seems utterly bizarre that as you see it, that just like as you see, um, so while they're in the suitcase, you can't do it. When you see their fleshy ear, you can do it. But then when you see this much of their head, then it's wrong to kill them. It's like what could even in principle be the feature that determines how much you have to know about the person to do it? Like it just strikes me as utterly bizarre that there would be an amount. So it's not that you have to like spell out the exact amount. It seems weird that there would be an amount, and it seems very unclear what in principle is supposed to determine what the amount has to be.
So first, I would say same goes for the cutoff between being, hairy and being bald. Exactly as Ibrahim is saying in the comments. I think this is true for a lot of vague things. You know, a promise versus a proposal, a a maybe you think there's a difference between a person and an inseminated egg, human egg. Uh, so it's like it's not obvious in all of these cases where to draw the line. But more importantly, you are also on the hook, right? So if you're all that matters is utility type of utilitarian, then you don't have to worry about the status or the individual who's got the utility. But once you think that what comes first is concern for individuals and only secondarily concern for how much utility they have, then I mean, it's not going to affect what's right and wrong for someone like Richard Yetter Chapel, who still thinks that like the total is what determines right and wrong, but or at least determines, what you should do. Uh, but like things like should I see this as a trade-off, right? So if I'm going to give a 50-50 chance to Al and Betty, um, I shouldn't feel kind of regret about this, 50-50 chance at a benefit. Whereas if I give the whole benefit to Al straight up, I should feel some regret because Betty's losing out now, and vice versa if I'm giving it to Betty. Not that I did the wrong
Wait, sorry,
thing,
I'm
but
not
just
sure I understand the case.
okay, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, sorry.
What do you mean by giving 50-50 chance to Al
Sorry,
and
sorry.
Betty?
Let me make it clear. Let's suppose you've got some utility you're distributing. So you're deciding whether to make Al happy or Betty happy. Now, if you pick Al, then if you're a person-centric utilitarian, you should think, although let's suppose the amount of utility is the same either way, who gets it changes. So I should actually feel some regret. It's like a trade-off. It's like having one type of job rather than another different but equally good job. Like I should feel some regret because this is good in different ways. Whereas if there's just two people, I know not who, and I can either help, you know, the one who's in room A or the one who's in room B, I shouldn't feel any regret about helping the one who's in room A versus the one who's in room B. Why not? Because I don't know who these people are. The grounds on which I care about them qua individual are the things that individuate them. I just don't know that. But when should I
Well,
start
yeah,
feeling regret? That'll depend on like, well, if I look them in the eyes, if I've seen a movie about their life, it's not obvious how much knowledge you need to start feeling like individual concern for somebody. And while it doesn't affect what's right and wrong, that the need for a cutoff will still arise on your view.
yeah, I guess I think so long as they're different people, you should always feel regret. Where like, um, even though you don't know who they are, you feel regret in that you know that there's some individual unique bearer of welfare. And
But
whoever they
let's, yeah,
are,
please.
you're losing out on their welfare. Sort of like, if you, uh, so suppose that right now the evolutionary process is going to play out one way. And you know that if you press a button, it'll play out in a completely different way that will be somewhat better. Like,
Yeah.
even though you don't know what creatures will rise, or like, you don't know exactly who you're feeling regret over, you do know, like, there is something really important that was lost. That is
Right.
to say, the thing that was lost was all those people who would have had that degree of well being. And and then it's just like, well, as you learn more about them, you get a clearer and clearer picture of what's lost, but you don't need some precise threshold.
Okay, this is great. We need to distinguish between the ex ante and ex post perspectives. So if I'm making a decision that will impose some costs on people, but I don't currently know who will pay that cost. So, for example, I propose everybody get some vaccines, but there's a certain group that has a certain genetic condition, but we don't know who they are. They're going to have a side effect. Okay, so in this, it might be in everybody's interests for everybody to get the vaccine. I feel like it's a very safe vaccine. Only one in a million is going to suffer. Um, but but ex post, when I know that at the end of all this, there's going to be somebody. I can't tell you who it is now, but I know it's going to be somebody that's going to suffer as a result of this, and they're going to think it's actually bad for me that I got this vaccine because I'm the unlucky bastard with the side effect. Okay, so I agree with you that if you think about things in an ex post sort of way, then there's grounds for regret when you change who's going to lose, even if you're not able to identify either loser in the beginning, right? So, like changing attack plans, the same number of civilians will die, uh, but I have no idea who these civilians are. Uh, there's a kind of weightiness to that's kind of how you're thinking of these ex post regrets. But I'm thinking of it in terms of ex ante. I actually think that that's the right way to think about regrets over one's decision. So for example, if I decide to distribute a benefit by flipping a coin to decide between two people, the prospect of that is totally neutral between the two. It's only I know that somebody's going to win the coin flip, but the coin flip itself sort of gives everybody an equal prospect. They each get a 50-50 shot at something good. And similarly, if I with the two attack plans, all that matter, I change who dies, but for each civilian in the war, they might think like, I don't have a preference between these two. As far as I know, they're equally good for me. So I actually think that like it's the ex ante perspective that matters for regret, whereas what you're saying presupposes it has to be the ex post perspective. You're saying I should regret something differently if I know that a different somebody will pay the price.
Wait, maybe I'm not getting the pic. So if if you take an action that benefits person A rather than person B, and then the question is, at what point do you feel sort of like unique regret about person A being where like you're like
Yeah.
you feel unique regret that person B didn't benefit? Well, my view is like, well, given that you know person A and person B are different, you always should feel some regret where you know, look, B was a person, and then as you learn more, like you learn more about the person. Right, so it's like, I don't know, suppose you kill someone. Um, I wouldn't recommend it, but,
That's a strong accusation, Matthew.
yeah. So you kill right, so you kill someone. Um, uh, and then the question is like, okay, at what point you regret, like, what's the threshold at which what you regret is that you killed someone? And at what point is the threshold at which what you regret is that you killed that person in particular?
Yeah,
Yeah, but I guess
exactly.
I don't really think there is some threshold where it's just like I don't I think those are sort of differences in degrees rather than kind, right? So at the beginning, you're only regretful that um that you killed um that you killed someone in general. And then as you learn more about the person, um you sort of are like you come to what you say, I killed, you know, the person with such and such properties. As you get a clearer picture, you understand more about the person you killed, but there isn't some like critical threshold at which you understand enough about the person for there to be some deep sense in which, well, once you know this amount, then you know who you killed.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just a
yeah.
it's just a agreed property.
Yeah, I agree. There's no sort of unique threshold. I mean, some people have this view in philosophy of mind and philosophy of language that, you know, um, there's like a sharp threshold at which you can start having what they call singular thought. So, you know, like the classic Quine example of the singular desires is, I want a sloop, where, on one reading, it's just there's a particular, boat that I want. And another reading is I desire mere relief from sleeplessness. And on some views, in order to have like singular thoughts about a particular sloop or a particular person or whatever, you just have to know something about them. So this is this is the extreme view. Like I say, like, Betty has legs. And you're like, yeah, I wonder how Betty's doing today. Like that's or Betty exists. You're like, oh, interesting. I wonder what her favorite color is. Like that kind of view is out there, but it's obviously kind of kooky, and I don't really know if there's a better one. So I suppose what I think is, it's vague when you know enough about somebody to sensibly care about them as an individual rather than as a mere somebody. And deontology is sort of at home and best defined and most natural when people aren't just somebodies and you know who everybody is. Um,
Yeah,
there's various fallbacks when you don't know that, but
I
it's sort of natural that, of course, we wouldn't be able to fully, precisely define the conditions in which deontology does its magic.
yeah, I guess my worry, it's not just that it's hard to know exactly where the point is. It's that it strikes me as being bizarre, like that there would be some point at which you know enough for like there's some first point or maybe first somewhat vague point, some somewhat vague point at which the action is wrong. But it seems weird that I don't know. It seems weird that like once you see this much of their head, then you get to do it. And there's I guess there's a problem. Another case that I think makes this even clearer. So now let's imagine. Okay, imagine that the people in the suitcases, they're identical twins, and they look exactly the same. Presumably, this doesn't change whether you should push the person, right? You should still push the person in the
Yeah.
case where, yeah. Um, okay. Um, but because they're identical twins, you know what all of them look like. Okay, so now let's imagine. Okay, so they're all in the suitcases. You should push them. But then right before you push them, the suitcase, they all break out of the suitcases. You have learned no new piece of information. You knew what they all looked like. And so then it's like, well, it can't be about the information you know because you already knew what they looked like, and so you haven't learned anything new.
So I think this is actually one of the deepest issues in philosophy of mind that you're bringing up, which is the limits of talk in terms of information, particularly when you get to singular thought and also when you get to certain types of qualitative experiences. So, I'll just give one example of this is like Mary, the color scientist, right? It might know. I'm gonna adapt the Mary example to this. So Mary, the color scientist, knows all this fabulous stuff about the physics of color and of color experience, but doesn't has never seen color. And one day, Mary looks at a red apple and says, "Huh, so that's what red looks like." This has been a big problem for physicalists who think that all information is physical information. Because Mary, by hypothesis, knows all the physical info you could ever want to know, but it seems like she learns something when she sees the red apple. Like, oh, that's what red looks like. Similarly, well, you got a case where I know everything about all the twins, or I know everything about all these people, but somehow I see them. I have an experience not just that tells me what they're like, but like of them. Like I see that they are in the object of my experience, and somehow it seems like I got something new out of that. So I actually just tend to think that you do get new information, just as Mary gets new information about red. You get new information. Someone can become available for singular thought in a way that they might not have been before. Uh,
Hmm.
when you
It's
see them for
I guess
yourself.
it seems weird that you would get new information when you already knew exactly what it is that you would see. Well, in the Mary case, Mary didn't already Mary did not know what red things would look like when she got out of the room.
That's
You
true.
do know what you would see. You know what the twins look like. So I guess
But do I know? But do I know who they are?
well, I don't think you know who a person whether you know who a person is comes from looking at them. Like I don't think that who a person is super well defined because I think really you just know increasingly large numbers of facts about the person. But I guess so. Let me. So okay, when the
Yeah,
people are
I am the guy that debated with Richard Chappell, by the way, Mark. Yes. That
yes,
that's all you need to know who I am.
Yeah, he also has papers or something
No,
about
no, no.
something.
Sorry, I was just punning off the know who stuff. I'm not trying to pretend Mark is reducing me. Uh, that's not a bad legacy, debating Richard.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, Many fine people have debated Richard. Um,
yeah,
uh,
he's got real guts, I think. And I think it's like really great that he goes out and like interfaces with bioethics and um, you know, outside of the field of ethics. Like I'm not one of these people that thinks that ethicists have to be constantly doing non-ethics to count as like contributing. I actually think like Casper's stuff on like the suitcases might sound kooky, but it actually like raises all these deep questions about, does it even make sense to care about people as individuals rather than just caring about the kind of bottom line of how happy they are, how much goodness is stuffed into their life. So I actually think like what Casper's doing is also
right. So
should
okay.
be part of the
So
ecosystem. Okay, but
yeah, yeah.
enough
So now,
commenting on Richard.
so um, so you think when the people are in the suitcases, it's wrong. You get to push them. When the twins are in the suitcase, then you get to push them. But after they're out of the suitcases, though you know exactly what they would look like you could imagine in your mind the visual scene that will await you when the suitcases are opened. But then after that's opened, then you get to do it in a way you don't
So,
when they're in the
so let me clarify. I was having a little bit of fun with the philosophy of mind stuff, but I think it's actual consent that explains everything. So once people get out of the excuse me, this once you know who's who, right? You know that, oh,
their mouths are duct taped shut. You can't
yeah,
hear.
I can't hear them, but I know that Bill is on the footbridge, and my option is to let uh Bill live or kill Bill. So I didn't even think about that when I started saying this, but or kill Bill and then save, Al, Carol,
Sorry,
Elaine,
sorry.
and so on.
I was imagining that you wouldn't know, like, because they're identical twins, you don't know
Oh,
who's
right,
who.
right, right, right. But
Right.
I know this one. I know this one's on the bridge, right?
Right.
But the
But you
thing
also
is,
know this, right? But if you say, I know this one, and you point to them, is on the bridge, you also knew that when they were in the suitcase.
yeah, it's interesting. Um, oh, can I hit you with the related case that might be good to just have on the table?
Sure.
Um, you may know this case. It's in Casper's paper, but I think it nicely kind of like brings out these like deep decision theory issues here. So imagine that you've got two things that are really good in different ways. Just as we've kind of been imagining like people's lives are good in different ways, even if neither person's more important. So, but just take it's like tickets. So here is a ticket to see Oprah. It's kind of exhilarating. It's like American classic. On the other hand, it's a ticket to the opera. Like, oh my, I'm gonna cry. It's a big, aria. It's gonna be really sick.
Those
Okay,
seem
now,
only to have one letter of difference. Those don't seem that different.
but the feeling, one you go home with the car, the other you go home with, whatever. Okay, so just imagine that modulate the quality of the opera until you think it's really on par with Oprah. Neither better nor worse. Now, it seems like either one would be kind of acceptable to pick. But what if you'd sweetened the Oprah one? So it's Oprah, and also you get a little like souvenir piece of chocolate or something. It's kind of nice. Or well, let's just make it even simple. Let's say you get $5. Uh, Casper thinks that most people still would not say that the sweetened version of Oprah beats the opera. Similarly, a sweetened version of the opera wouldn't beat Oprah. So going to the opera and getting $5 wouldn't be better, all things considered, than going to see Oprah. Now, there's various ways you can analyze this. You could put it in terms of our preferences are constantly shifting, and so some of the shifts would allow for or you could put it in terms of like just the fundamental ranking of values is incomplete. So even though Oprah Plus beats Oprah, and Oprah ties the opera. Oprah Plus doesn't tie, or doesn't beat the opera, but ties the opera. Okay, so anyway, however you want to think about that, let's suppose that you grant me that Oprah sweetened or unsweetened ties the opera sweetened or unsweetened. And now here's the kicker. I put the tickets in envelopes. So I've flipped a coin. If heads, it's opera in this one, Oprah in that one. If tails, the reverse. Okay, now seems still like permissible to pick either one. But here's the question. Suppose I put $5 on the envelope on your left. Should you take the envelope with the money on it, or would it be permissible to take either envelope? How do you think about this? It's
Sorry.
called
So
opaque sweetening because the sweetening is added to one option, but you
I
don't
guess
know which option, Oprah versus opera.
I just take this to be a demonstration that you shouldn't have preferences like this, because I think this just shows that if you have there's a tension. You can't think incomplete preferences are rational while also maintaining dominance and maintaining that if some version of the reflection principle, where if you know that 5 minutes from now you'll be indifferent after learning the outcomes of the gambles, you'll be indifferent between two gambles, then you should be indifferent now. These just conflict because the one with one half of A plus and one half of B. So like the version I remember from the hair case. So coins flipped. If heads, you get A plus. So there's gambles 1 and 2, and there's A, B, and A plus, where A plus is better than A, and both A plus and B are incomparable. Both A plus and A are incomparable with B. So then what gamble 1 gives you is if it comes up heads, you get A plus, and if it comes up tails, you get B. And gamble 2, if heads, you get B, and if tails, you get A. So
Or B
if it's
plus and A. Or no. Sorry. B and A. You're right.
right,
It's either
and so
A plus and B
but
or B A.
right, so
Got it.
so by dominance, it seems like the first gamble should beat the second gamble. Then, but it seems like the first gamble shouldn't be the second gamble because you know that whether the coin comes up heads or tails, you'll either end up with A plus rather than B or B rather than A. In neither case are you glad you took the gamble. In both cases, you're indifferent. And so
Yeah,
the overall
exactly.
right. And so I just take this to illustrate that incompleteness is irrational.
But
And
I just to me it seems totally reasonable. You should just take the envelope with the money on it. It's free money.
um
You know,
no, well, I guess right. So I agree you should take A plus. Right. So I think it's clearer that you should take the one with a one half chance of A plus and one half chance of B. But then
wait,
it also strikes me
yeah, sorry, okay,
as
keep
really
up.
clear that the kind of reflection principle that I invoked also strikes me as seeming very hard to get like very hard to give up. And so together, I just think these entail that you shouldn't have incomplete preferences.
So we should talk about this because I feel like one of the real sort of sources of suction towards utilitarianism is the idea that you should have transitive and complete preferences. So for people who haven't heard these terms in a little while, maybe never heard these terms, a relation's transitive when, so let's say preferences are transitive when if you prefer A to B and B to C, then you prefer A to C. Just like the old transitive property from algebra. Completeness means you've made either you prefer. So actually, let's use weak preference. So weak preference is like sort of either tied or better. So if I either prefer weakly A to B or I weakly prefer B to A. So I'm never just like complete shrug. Either I'm indifferent, I weakly prefer each to the other, or I've got a strict preference. I think one's preferable to the other.
Right. Either A is
So
better than B is better than A, or they're equal.
yeah. So let's just do it with value. Yeah. So if you got transitivity and completeness, what you basically got is you can rank everything, potentially with ties. Right. So if at least as good as is transitive and complete, you can rank everything potentially with ties. And the benefit of rankings is that if you know that, you know, uh, this outranks that, it also outranks anything that this ties with or anything that this beats. So it's very straightforward. The problem is that it just seems totally false to me. It's just completely not right. Like, I mean, take like good albums. I mean, I realize that for utilitarian, you might want to do it with utility, but just like bear with me for a second. Let's do aesthetic value. So like, if you could really rank like all of the music albums ever made in terms of which are better than which, um, it seems absurd to me. Like, you know, uh, there's a lot of cases where it's not obvious which is better, even if no matter how much I learned about them and how refined my tastes were. I think like two things just could be so good in different ways that slightly improving one wouldn't just decisively mean that it beats the other, but they're still sort of tied, as it were, they're incomparable. It's similar with utility. Like, I really don't think it's obvious how to rank causing some small harms to people alive today versus creating some happy uh, life that otherwise wouldn't exist. Oh, Kieran Sedia has joined the chat. Um,
What?
yeah, we were talking about some of the Kieran Casper stuff on suitcases earlier. Terrific. But yeah, so I really
I
think.
do actually I do want to revisit that at some point, but
Oh yeah,
uh
yeah, happy to. But sorry, just to wrap this up, I've gone on a little bit. I think you're right to pick on this. If it's true that ethical rankings had to be transitive and complete, deontologists and pluralists and person-centric people in general are going to have a harder time. It'd be easy if you could just say that rights always trump utility, but given the case of Feinberg's cabin we talked about earlier, I just don't think that's true. Tiny little rights lose to gigantic amounts of utility. Well, I can break your pencil if it saves 10 lives. Um, so I mean, even without your consent. Uh, so
yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at. I think you're right to press on this. This is really the best weak spot for deontologists and pluralists.
Yeah, I
But I'm not convinced.
so like I've never it's always seemed clear to me that you shouldn't have incomplete preferences. Like I actually I remember when I was like 10 with something. So I've never found the position intuitive. And then I kind of think there are all these like decision theory reasons to think it's a bit suspicious. So there's the kind of the hair argument that you were talking about before. That one strikes me as the most convincing. Then there's the kind of decision theory weirdness where it's like, so suppose you have A plus. Well, it seems permissible to trade A plus for B, to trade B for A if they're incomplete, but then you shouldn't do both of those. And it's like, well, so then where did the irrationality lie? Which of the actions was irrational? And um, then if the answer is, well, the one of the actions that was like sort of like each action was irrational in light of the other one. What seems weird that like if you have A and you're deciding whether to trade it for you had or especially you could imagine the trade took place like millions of years in the past or something, and that seems sort of like why should whether I trade A for B depend on whether I made a trade for A millions of years ago if this doesn't affect the prospect. But then it also seems like whether you should trade A plus for B won't be mitigated by um the future edition ability to trade for A because it's like, well, the fact that an action gives you more options, assuming you're rational, shouldn't count against it. You shouldn't be like, ah, darn, if I do this good thing, then I'll be able to take another action, which I'll do only if I evaluate it as desirable, and if not, can always turn down. And so and then lastly, there are these sort of more exotic money pump style arguments. Johann Gustafsson has a book where he attempts to show that basically if you do deviate from expected utility theory in any way, you're hit with half a dozen different money pumps. Now,
Yes.
and so I guess when I consider these arguments as a whole, and I just never had that incomplete intuitions to start with, then it strikes me as pretty suspicious. I would be curious, what do you think of it? Do you think that the better than relation is at least transitive?
I'm actually kind of unsure what I think about this. So when I'm not just doing straight up deontology, sometimes I do value theory, and I've written a little bit about transitivity. And what's funny is I don't really know what to think about it, but I'm kind of trying out defending the strangest view there is. So is betterness does betterness have to be transitive? Well, I'm not sure that it's incoherent if betterness fails to be transitive. How could it fail? I mean, why isn't it incoherent? If A is better than B and B is better than C, how could C be better than A? Well, if betterness is sort of speaking on behalf of a bunch of different values, like lowercase v, different values, then I think it's a familiar thought that um, when you aggregate things that are transitive, you can end up with something that's not. So, I mean, one very famous example is majority rule. So, a majority of people might prefer A to B and B to C, but then prefer C to A. Actually, can I give you my favorite example of this? Just because it's nice and visual, involves a circle. So imagine that we have,
Oh, I've seen those before.
yeah, spoilers. Okay, so imagine that we're deciding whether to have a party at A's house, B's house, or C's house, and people walk clockwise. So A lives at A's house, obviously. B's at B's, C's at C's. So each wants to walk less. So who prefers the house being at A versus B? Well, A prefers it and C prefers it. So actually, A is going to beat B. What about B and C? Well, by the same logic, B will prefer having the party at B's, and so will A. What about C's? Well, then B and C will both prefer it. So you get this cycle. A beats B, B beats C, C beats A. So this is called Condorcet's paradox, after the Marquis de Condorcet, who lived an interesting life and was involved in the French Revolution and so on. Um, back in the day, the French mathematicians were really concerned about elections to academies, so they studied voting. But so in a nutshell, I think when you start thinking about how votes combine, you could see how like society's preferences might fail to be transitive. Um, Similarly, when you think about how values combine, you start to think, well, why couldn't overall betterness also fail to be transitive? Uh, on the other hand, there are these arguments that like better, like as an ER word, just sort of as a matter of like language, must be transitive because maybe all comparative adjectives have to be transitive. Better, taller, hotter, wetter, you know, harder, better, faster, stronger, etc. So, if that's right, if language forces better to be transitive on pain of gibberish, then actually, this is a paper I'm doing a revision for a journal on right now. I think that we have to give up better. If you really believe in like non-transitivity, because of cases like the repugnant conclusion, for those of you who've heard of that before, um, but if you really
The
want to insist that,
so-called repugnant
so oh
conclusion.
my God, this is somebody who is really shrimp pilled.
I call it the trivial conclusion.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Okay, but you get the point. So if for people that are not so Benthamitely tempted, then I think what you should say is better is a rough approximation, and the notion we're really interested in is something like beats. A beats B, B beats C, C beats A. And transitivity has got to go. Um, so I think of this like a kind of lot. What you do is you logically subtract the inconvenient property of transitivity from the notion of betterness to get to what you really want. Just as Parfit thought, Derek Parfit thought, you have to subtract some logical properties from. Well, he didn't quite put it this way, but he thought that personal identity wasn't what really matters in survival. Identity's got a very strict logic. It's got to be transitive and symmetric and so on. Um, and so, given that your brain could be split and there could be two people as a result that have equally strong claims to being Matthew in the future, but they're distinct, so they can't both be Matthew. Otherwise, they would be each other. Parfit says, well, what this shows is that identity isn't what really matters to us in survival. Similarly, I think that if you believe that transitivity fails, it's not betterness that matters. It's some other thing that underlies it. Something like
Yeah.
beating or defeating.
Yeah. So I majorly agree with that. Unfortunately, I should get going somewhat
Oh,
soon.
perfect timing. I gotta go.
Yeah.
It's tomato day here in Carborough, North Carolina, and we're supposed to go eat some tomatoes with some friends.
Okay.
Um,
Nice. But yes, definitely happy to chat again sometime. This has been a very interesting chat. Um,
this was great. So I'm guessing you're not yet a deontologist, but
right.
but I I feel like we got somewhere on the trolleys and suitcases. I'm gonna give that another. I might go take another look at that, and I'll write something on this. Anyway, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thanks for the questions to everybody in the chat.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. And yeah, thanks for doing this. It's been lots of fun. All right. Have a
Anytime.
nice rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for chatting, Daniel. Bye.
Thanks everybody. Any follow-up questions, just send me an email or something.